I never meant for any of this to happen. That's what everyone says, right? But seriously, I didn't. When I moved into this apartment with Ethan at the beginning of sophomore year, I was just happy to have escaped the nightmare of dorm living. Happy to have found someone normal to split rent with in this overpriced college town. Happy that he didn't seem to care that I was gay, unlike my last roommate who suddenly started wearing shower shoes and avoiding eye contact after I came out to him. Ethan was different from the start. 6'2", always in faded jeans and plain t-shirts that somehow looked deliberate rather than lazy, with this permanent 5 o'clock shadow that he maintained with mysterious precision. The kind of effortlessly attractive straight guy who grew up in a small town playing 3 sports, but somehow emerged without the toxic masculinity that usually comes attached. The kind who says dude a lot, but also remembers your birthday. The kind who has dated a series of increasingly beautiful women, but treats them all with genuine respect that makes it impossible to hate him for it. The first time I noticed something strange was about 3 months into our living arrangement. It was a Thursday night in November. Nothing special about it. We were sitting on our secondhand couch watching some forgettable Netflix show, empty pizza box between us, when Ethan's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, sighed heavily, and put the phone face down on the coffee table. "Women, man," he said. But there was something off in his voice. I nodded sympathetically, but didn't press. We'd established this rhythm. I never asked too many questions about his love life, and he never commented when I came home late on weekends from seeing guys whose names I didn't always remember. "You want another beer?" he asked, standing up and stretching. His shirt rolled up slightly, exposing a strip of skin above his waistband, and I looked away so quickly I almost gave myself whiplash. "Yeah, sure," I said, focusing intently on the TV screen, though I couldn't have told you what was happening on it. He returned with 2 bottles cold from the fridge, and when he handed mine over, our fingers brushed. Nothing unusual about that. Nothing at all, except that his lingered for maybe half a second longer than necessary. Probably my imagination. Definitely my imagination. 3 beers later, the night had shifted into that easy, slightly hazy space where conversations become both more superficial and somehow deeper at the same time. We'd abandoned whatever we were watching, and Spotify was playing softly in the background. "Can I ask you something, Liam?" Ethan said suddenly, his voice quiet but clear in our small living room. Something in his tone made my heart rate pick up. "Yeah, man, what's up?" I tried to sound casual, but my mouth had gone slightly dry. "How did you know that you were—" He trailed off, rotating his beer bottle slowly between his palms, eyes fixed on the label. "Gay?" I finished for him, because we were both adults and this shouldn't be awkward between roommates, between friends. He nodded, still not looking up. I took a breath, buying time. It's a question I've been asked before, usually by well-meaning drunk girls at parties, occasionally by curious hookups in the aftermath of sex. Never by someone whose answer mattered to me quite this much. "I just knew," I said finally, opting for honesty over the sanitized version I usually give. There wasn't some big moment of realization. It was like everyone around me was pretending something was true that just wasn't, and eventually I stopped pretending along with them. I paused, trying to find the right words. "But also, boys are hot," I added with a small laugh, trying to lighten the suddenly heavy atmosphere. Ethan smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Must be nice," he said quietly, "to just know something like that about yourself." Before I could ask what he meant, he stood up abruptly. "I should probably get some sleep. Early class tomorrow." It was barely midnight, and I knew for a fact his earliest Friday class was at 11 a.m., but I just nodded. "Yeah, man, no problem. Good night." He hesitated for a moment, like he wanted to say something else, then just raised his hand in a half-wave before disappearing down the hallway to his bedroom. I sat there alone for a long time after he left, replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out what had just happened. Was he just curious? Was this one of those straight guy things where they want to understand the gay experience to prove how progressive they are? Or was it something else entirely? The thought made my stomach twist in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. I finished my beer, told myself I was being ridiculous, and went to bed. The next few weeks passed without incident. Ethan didn't bring up our late-night conversation, and I didn't either. We fell back into our comfortable routines, classes, studying at the kitchen table together, occasional parties where we'd arrive together, but inevitably separate as the night went on. He dated a girl named Amber for about 2 weeks before it fizzled out. I had a brief, ill-advised reconnection with an ex that left me irritable and withdrawn for a few days. Normal college stuff. Nothing to indicate that anything had shifted between us, except sometimes I'd catch him looking at me when he thought I wouldn't notice. While I was cooking pasta for dinner, focused on not letting it boil over. When I emerged from the bathroom after a shower, t-shirt sticking slightly to my damp skin. During movie nights when the blue light from the screen cast shadows across both our faces. Quick glances, barely there before they were gone, but each one left a ghost impression like a camera flash against my eyelids. Winter break came, and we went our separate ways. Me to my parents' house in Connecticut, him back to his family's farm in rural Pennsylvania. We texted occasionally, nothing deep. Merry Christmas, and how's the break going? And did you watch the game last night? The distance helped clear my head. Whatever I thought I'd noticed was just projection, wishful thinking maybe, or worse. The kind of predatory assumption that gives gay men a bad name. Ethan was straight. He had never given me any real reason to question that. I resolved to get my shit together when we got back to campus. When we returned for spring semester, something had changed. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice, but I could feel it. Ethan seemed more closed off, more deliberately casual. He started going to the gym more often, coming back sweaty and immediately disappearing into the shower. He mentioned a girl named Kayla a few times, though I never actually saw her. Our movie nights became less frequent, and when they did happen, he sat a careful distance away from me on the couch. February arrived with biting winds and dirty snow piled along the sidewalks. I was struggling through midterms, staying up too late and drinking too much coffee. One night I was at the kitchen table surrounded by textbooks and empty Red Bull cans when Ethan came home around midnight. I could tell immediately that he'd been drinking. Not sloppy drunk, but loose-limbed and smiling in that unguarded way alcohol sometimes produces. "Liam, my man," he said, dropping his keys on the counter with a clatter that made me wince. "You're still up?" He wandered over and peered at my notes. "Organic chemistry? That's brutal. You should take a break." I rubbed my eyes, which were burning from staring at molecular structures for hours. "Can't. Exams tomorrow and I'm nowhere near ready." He made a sympathetic noise and disappeared into the kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of water. He placed one in front of me. "At least stay hydrated while you destroy your brain cells." I thanked him and took a sip, watching as he pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. He was wearing a dark blue Henley I hadn't seen before, and his hair was slightly rumpled, like he'd been running his hands through it. "How was your night?" I asked, trying to refocus on my notes but finding it increasingly difficult. "Fine," he said. Then after a pause, "Actually, no, it was weird." I looked up at that, curiosity piqued. "I went on a date with Kayla," he continued, tracing patterns in the condensation on his water glass. "She's great, you know? Smart, funny, definitely hot." I nodded, not sure where this was going but feeling a familiar twist of something like disappointment in my stomach. "We went back to her place after dinner, started making out on her couch, and—" He trailed off, staring intently at his glass. "And?" I prompted, when it became clear he wasn't going to continue without encouragement. "And I couldn't do it," he said finally, voice so low I had to lean forward to hear him. "She's literally perfect on paper, and I just couldn't get into it. Made some excuse about not feeling well and left." He looked up then, and the raw confusion in his eyes caught me off guard. "What the fuck is wrong with me, Liam?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't sure either of us was ready to address. "Nothing's wrong with you," I said carefully, hyper-aware of the dangerous territory we were approaching. "Sometimes chemistry just isn't there, even when it seems like it should be." He held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe." But he didn't sound convinced. He stood up, stretching in a way that made his shirt ride up again, a sight I'd become simultaneously more accustomed to and more affected by over the months. "I'm gonna crash. Good luck with your studying." He hesitated, then reached out and squeezed my shoulder briefly. His hand was warm through the fabric of my t-shirt, and I fought the urge to lean into the touch. "Thanks for listening, man." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with my textbooks and racing thoughts. I didn't get much studying done after that. The tension between us grew in small increments over the following weeks. Longer glances, accidental but not quite touches when we passed each other in our narrow hallway. Conversations that danced around something neither of us was willing to name. Ethan stopped mentioning Kayla or any other girls. I stopped trying to date at all, too preoccupied with the slow-motion collision course I seemed to be on with my roommate. March brought unexpected warmth. A fall spring that had everyone on campus shedding winter layers and spending too much time outside before the cold inevitably returned. Ethan suggested we go for a hike on one particularly beautiful Saturday, and I agreed, even though hiking has never really been my thing. We drove about 30 minutes outside of town to a trail he knew from some previous excursion. The woods were quiet except for occasional birdsong and the distant sound of running water. "There's a creek up ahead," Ethan said, leading the way along the narrow path. "It's pretty cool. We can stop there for lunch." I nodded, focusing on not tripping over tree roots while simultaneously trying not to notice how good Ethan looked in his worn jeans and faded green t-shirt, how the sunlight filtering through the trees created patterns of light and shadow across his shoulders. The creek was indeed pretty cool. Clear water rushing over smooth rocks, surrounded by moss-covered fallen trees that created perfect natural seating. We sat side by side on one of these logs, eating the sandwiches we'd packed and drinking water from our bottles. The conversation flowed easily about nothing important: classes, mutual friends, a movie we both wanted to see. Normal stuff. But beneath it ran an undercurrent of something else, a frequency I could feel humming between us. "I come here sometimes to think," Ethan said after a comfortable lull, "when things get too noisy in my head." He was looking out at the water, profile sharp against the backdrop of trees and sky. "What kind of things?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not respond at all. "Then, things I can't figure out. Things about myself." He turned to look at me then, and there was something so naked in his expression that I had to look away. "Ethan," I started, not knowing what I was going to say but feeling like I needed to say something. He cut me off. "We should head back. It'll start getting dark soon." It was barely 3 p.m., but, I didn't argue. The walk back to the car was mostly silent, heavy with all the words we weren't saying. I caught him looking at me several times, but whenever our eyes met, he quickly looked away. The drive home was filled with forced conversation about upcoming assignments and weekend plans, both of us pretending everything was normal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from the past few months in my head, trying to separate reality from wishful thinking. At around 2 a.m., I got up to get a glass of water, moving quietly through our dark apartment. As I passed Ethan's room, I noticed his door was slightly ajar. Unusual, as he typically slept with it closed. A thin strip of light indicated he was still awake. I hesitated, then continued to the kitchen, telling myself it was none of my business. Water glass in hand, I was heading back to my room when Ethan's door opened wider. He stood in the doorway, wearing only sweatpants, hair mussed as if he'd been tossing and turning. "Hey," he said softly. "Can't sleep either?" I shook my head, suddenly very aware that I was wearing only boxers and an old t-shirt. "Just getting some water," I said unnecessarily, holding up my glass as evidence. He nodded, eyes moving over me in a way that made me feel both exposed and seen. "Do you want to—" He gestured vaguely toward his room. "Hang out for a bit? I was just watching stupid YouTube videos." It was such a normal request. The kind of thing roommates do all the time. Yet in that moment, at that hour, it felt weighted with significance. "Sure," I said, because what else could I say? I followed him into his room where his laptop was open on his bed, paused on some video. I perched awkwardly on the edge of his mattress while he sat against the headboard, leaving a careful space between us. We watched random videos for about an hour, compilations of fails, movie trailers, a cooking demonstration neither of us was actually interested in. Gradually, the initial awkwardness faded, and I relaxed, leaning back against the wall. At some point, Ethan shifted and our shoulders touched. Neither of us moved away. I was hyper-aware of the point of contact, of the warmth of his skin through my thin t-shirt, of the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Liam," he said suddenly, his voice low and serious. He closed the laptop, plunging the room into darkness save for the faint glow of his bedside alarm clock. "Yeah?" I responded, heart hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it. There's something I've been wanting to tell you. The darkness made it both easier and harder. I couldn't see his expression, but maybe that was the point. You can tell me anything, I said, and meant it. He took a deep breath, and in the dim light, I could see him running a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd come to recognize. I don't know how to say this. I've never... I'm not... He trailed off, frustration evident in his voice. Then, with sudden determination, can I show you instead? Before I could process what he meant, he was moving closer, hand reaching out to cup my face. I froze, afraid that any movement might shatter this moment that felt both inevitable and impossible. And then Ethan was leaning in, his breath warm against my lips, hovering there for a heartbeat as if giving me a chance to pull away. When I didn't, he closed the distance between us. The kiss was tentative at first, just a gentle press of lips, but it sent electricity racing down my spine. Then, as if something broke loose inside him, he deepened the kiss, hands sliding to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. My brain short-circuited. This was Ethan, my straight roommate Ethan, kissing me like he'd been thinking about it for as long as I had. I responded instinctively, kissing him back, one hand finding its way to his bare chest, feeling his heart racing under my palm. The kiss grew more urgent, months of unspoken tension pouring into it. His other hand gripped my waist, fingers digging in slightly as if he was afraid I might disappear. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, reality came crashing back. What the fuck had just happened? Ethan's face was unreadable in the low light, but his hand was still on my neck, thumb tracing small circles on my skin. Ethan? I started, voice hoarse. I thought, you always said... He cut me off with a brief, almost desperate kiss, then pulled back again. I know what I said, he whispered, forehead resting against mine. I believed it too, or tried to. But Liam, I can't stop thinking about you. I've tried everything. Dating girls, ignoring it, keeping my distance. Nothing works. His voice broke slightly. I don't know what this means, what I am. I just know that right now, this feels like the only thing that makes sense. My mind was reeling, trying to process everything. The implications, the complications, the thousand ways this could go wrong. But with Ethan's hands on me, his confession hanging in the air between us, none of that seemed to matter. I had wanted this for so long without allowing myself to admit it. Now that it was happening, I couldn't bring myself to analyze it to death. Stay, he whispered, the single word carrying more meaning than any speech could have. Please, just stay with me tonight. There was vulnerability in his voice I'd never heard before, and it undid me completely. I knew we should talk, that there were 100 questions we needed to answer, but talking could wait until morning. Right now, all I wanted was to be close to him. Okay, I said softly, and felt him relax against me. We lay down together on his narrow bed, faces inches apart. Ethan reached out, tracing the line of my jaw with his fingertips like he was memorizing it. I've wanted to do that for so long, he confessed, voice barely audible. Then he leaned in again, and this time when our lips met, it felt like coming home. I woke up gradually, sunlight filtering through unfamiliar blinds. For a moment, I couldn't place where I was, then it all came rushing back. Ethan's room, Ethan's bed. The weight of his arm draped across my waist, his steady breathing warm against the back of my neck. Last night hadn't been a dream. I lay perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had allowed this impossible thing to happen. Afraid that daylight would bring regret, explanations, the word mistake hanging between us. Behind me, Ethan stirred. I felt him tense slightly as consciousness returned, felt the exact moment he remembered I was there. My heart hammered in my chest as I waited for his reaction. Would he pull away? Make some joke to defuse the situation? Pretend to still be asleep until I left? Instead, after a brief hesitation, he pulled me closer, his arm tightening around me. Morning, he murmured, voice rough with sleep, lips brushing against my shoulder. Something in my chest unclenched. Morning, I responded, barely trusting my voice. We stayed like that for a while, neither of us willing to break the fragile peace of the moment with the complications of conversation. Eventually, the real world intruded, my phone alarm blaring from my room, reminding me of a study group I'd committed to. I have to go, I said reluctantly, turning to face him for the first time that morning. Ethan looked different somehow, softer around the edges, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something almost vulnerable. He nodded, fingers trailing down my arm as I sat up. "We should talk," he said. "Later?" It was both a statement and a question. "Later," I agreed, and slipped out of his room. The day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, attended my study group, picked up coffee, responded to texts, but my mind remained fixated on the night before. On the feeling of Ethan's lips against mine, the surprising softness of them, on the desperate edge to his kiss, like he'd been holding himself back for too long, on the words he'd spoken in the darkness. "I can't stop thinking about you." I kept checking my phone, though I wasn't sure what I was expecting. We lived together. Whatever conversation we needed to have would happen face to face. When I finally returned to the apartment that evening, I found it empty. A note on the kitchen counter in Ethan's messy handwriting. "At the gym. Back around 8. We'll talk then." Simple, practical, and yet reading it made my stomach twist with anxiety. 4 hours at the gym was excessive. Even for Ethan, he was avoiding me. Or maybe he was just giving us both space to think. I couldn't decide which possibility worried me more. I tried to distract myself, cleaned my room, started a paper that wasn't due for weeks, called my sister, and managed to have an entire conversation without mentioning Ethan once. But underneath every action ran a current of anticipation, dread, hope, all twisted together into something I couldn't untangle. By 7:30, I was sitting on the couch pretending to read a book while actually watching the door. At 8:15, I was checking my phone every few minutes. At 8:45, I was convincing myself that he'd changed his mind, that he was never coming back, that I'd imagined the whole thing. The door finally opened at 9:12. Ethan walked in, gym bag slung over his shoulder, hair damp from a recent shower. He looked tired but determined, like someone who'd spent hours working through something in his head. "Hey," he said, dropping his bag by the door. "Sorry I'm late." He didn't offer an explanation, and I didn't ask for one. "It's fine," I said, setting down my book. "Do you want something to drink? I made coffee earlier." He shook his head, then seemed to reconsider. "Actually, yeah, coffee would be good." I moved to the kitchen, grateful for something to do with my hands. We were dancing around the conversation, both knowing it had to happen, but neither quite ready to begin. I handed him a mug, our fingers brushing briefly, sending a jolt through me that was ridiculous given everything that had happened between us the night before. "Thanks," he said, taking a sip even though it must have been lukewarm by now. "So," we both said simultaneously, then laughed, the tension breaking slightly. "You go first," I offered. Ethan nodded, set down his mug, and took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about this all day," he started, trying to figure out what to say. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar nervous gesture, and continued. "I don't want you to think that last night was impulsive, or that I was drunk or experimenting or any of that shit." His eyes met mine, steady and serious. "It wasn't a mistake, Liam." Relief washed over me, so intense it was almost dizzying. "Okay," I said, because I didn't trust myself with more words than that. "But," he continued, and my heart sank at that single syllable, "I'm still figuring this out. What it means. Who I am." He looked down at his hands. "I've never felt this way about a guy before. Just you. And it's been fucking with my head for months now." "Months?" I couldn't help asking. He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Pretty much since you moved in. At first I thought it was just, I don't know, admiration or something. You've always been so comfortable with who you are. But then," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Then I couldn't stop noticing things. The way you hum when you're cooking, how your whole face lights up when you laugh, the little crease between your eyebrows when you're concentrating on something." Each observation felt like a revelation. He had been watching me just as closely as I'd been watching him. "I tried to ignore it," he continued. "Dated other people, kept my distance, nothing worked." He looked up at me again, expression raw. "Last night, I just couldn't pretend anymore." I moved closer to him, drawn by the vulnerability in his voice. "I'm glad you didn't," I said softly. He reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers like it was the most natural thing in the world. "But Liam," he said, "I need to go slow with this. I'm not..." I can't just jump into something when I'm still trying to understand what this means about me. I nodded, tamping down the disappointment that rose in me. That makes sense, I said, because it did, even if part of me wanted to rush headlong into whatever this was becoming. We can figure it out together. No pressure, no labels. The relief in his eyes was worth the patience it would require. Thank you, he said, squeezing my hand, for understanding. Then he leaned forward and kissed me, soft and sweet and unhurried, and I kissed him back, trying to convey without words that I'd wait as long as he needed. When we broke apart, there was a lightness between us that hadn't been there before, the relief of secrets finally spoken aloud. What followed was the strangest, most beautiful limbo I'd ever experienced. On the surface, our lives continued much as before, classes, studying, the mundane routines of college life. But underneath ran this new current, this unspoken language of glances and touches that we were learning together. Ethan was true to his word about taking things slow. Most nights we slept in our separate beds, though occasionally I'd wake up to find him slipping under my covers in the early hours of the morning, seeking closeness in the darkness when his doubts were quieter. We didn't put a name to what we were doing. We didn't tell anyone, though I suspected my friend Aisha had picked up on the shift between us when she visited our apartment and caught the way Ethan's eyes followed me across the room. "So you and the roommate, huh?" she'd said later when we were alone. I'd neither confirmed nor denied it, but my silence was answer enough. "Be careful," she'd advised, squeezing my arm. "Straight boys exploring can leave collateral damage." I'd nodded, acknowledging the risk even as I silently objected to her categorization of Ethan. Whatever he was or wasn't, it felt more complicated than that. 3 weeks into our undefined relationship, we had our first fight. It started over something trivial. Dishes left in the sink, I think. Or maybe it was laundry left in the dryer. The kind of minor roommate annoyance that normally wouldn't have escalated beyond a quick apology. But the real tension bubbling beneath had nothing to do with domestic responsibilities. "You know what? Forget it," Ethan snapped after I'd made some passive-aggressive comment about cleanliness. "I'm going out." It was a Friday night, and suddenly I was seized by the question of where he was going. With whom? We hadn't discussed exclusivity. We hadn't discussed anything, really, beyond the immediate reality of us. "Out where?" I asked, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. He shrugged, already reaching for his jacket. "Does it matter?" There was an edge to his voice I hadn't heard before, a defensive brittleness. "I guess not," I replied, matching his tone. "You don't owe me an explanation." He paused, hand on the doorknob, something like guilt flickering across his face. "Liam," he started, then stopped. "I'm just meeting some people from my economics class for drinks. It's not what you're thinking." I didn't ask what he thought I was thinking. I wasn't sure I wanted to know how transparent my jealousy was. "Have fun," I said, turning away. I heard him sigh, then the sound of the door opening and closing. I spent the evening alternating between pretending I didn't care where he was and checking my phone for texts that didn't come. Around midnight, I gave up on waiting and went to bed, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Whatever was happening between us, we'd never established any kind of commitment. Ethan was free to go wherever, with whomever. The thought brought no comfort. I was still awake when he came home at 1:30 a.m., listening to the familiar sounds of him moving around the apartment, keys dropping on the counter, water running in the bathroom, floorboards creaking in the hallway. When my door cracked open, I kept my eyes closed, feigning sleep. There was a long pause, then the soft sound of retreating footsteps. Something like disappointment settled in my chest. I turned over, pulling the covers tighter around me, and tried to convince myself it was better this way. Less complicated, less chance of getting hurt. A knock on my door woke me the next morning. I opened my eyes to find sunlight streaming through my blinds and Ethan standing in the doorway holding 2 coffee cups from the cafe down the street. "Peace offering," he said, holding one out to me. I sat up, accepting it wordlessly. He hovered uncertainly before gesturing to the edge of my bed. "Can I?" I nodded, and he sat down, careful to leave space between us. "I'm sorry about last night," he said after a moment. "I was a jerk." I sipped my coffee, perfectly made with oat milk and cinnamon, exactly how I like it. "It's fine," I said, though we both knew it wasn't. "We never said this was exclusive or anything." The words tasted bitter despite the sweetness of the coffee. Ethan frowned. That's not, he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I wasn't with anyone else, if that's what you're worried about. I really was just out with people from class. You don't have to explain, I said, though relief was already spreading through me. Yes, I do, he insisted, because I handled it badly. I got defensive because… He trailed off, looking down at his hands. Because this still scares me sometimes. What I feel for you. What it means about who I am. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and honest. So when you questioned me about where I was going, it felt like pressure and I panicked. I was quiet for a moment, absorbing his words. It scares me too, I admitted finally. Not the same way, but I've never felt like this about anyone before, and I don't know where this is going, or if it's going anywhere at all. It was a relief to say it out loud, to acknowledge the uncertainty that had been gnawing at me. Ethan looked up, his expression softening. It's going somewhere, he said quietly. I just need time to figure out the destination. He reached for my hand then, intertwining our fingers like he had that first night. But I'm not interested in anyone else, Liam. Just you. Has been just you for a long time now. The simple declaration made something bloom in my chest, warm and hopeful. Okay, I said, squeezing his hand. Me too. Just… you? He smiled then, the tension between us dissolving. He leaned forward and kissed me, tasting of coffee and possibility, and I felt myself falling deeper into whatever this was between us. After that, something shifted. Ethan seemed more at ease, more certain. The careful distance he'd maintained began to disappear. He'd reach for my hand when we were watching TV, rest his head on my shoulder while studying, kiss me in the kitchen while coffee brewed. Small, everyday intimacies that somehow meant more than the heated moments in darkness. We still hadn't put a label on what we were, but it was beginning to feel less like confusion and more like choice, a deliberate decision to let our relationship be whatever it was without forcing it into familiar categories. Spring break arrived, bringing with it decisions about where to go, what to do. My parents are expecting me home, Ethan said one evening as we lay intertwined on the couch, some forgotten movie playing in the background. I nodded against his chest, having expected as much. My own plans involved a road trip with friends, arrangements made months ago, before everything had changed between us. A whole week apart, I said, aiming for lightness but hearing the undercurrent of uncertainty in my voice. A week felt like an eternity when everything between us still felt so new, so fragile. Actually, Ethan said hesitantly, I was thinking, would you want to come with me to Pennsylvania? I propped myself up to look at him, surprised. To meet your family? The implication hung in the air. This would be a step, a definition of sorts. He nodded, expression a mix of nervousness and determination. They know about you already, as my roommate. And I'm not saying I'm ready to tell them everything, but I want you there. With me. The invitation settled over me, its significance clear. This wasn't just about a vacation. It was Ethan integrating me into his life in a new way. What about your road trip? He asked when I didn't immediately respond. I thought about explaining to my friends, about the questions it would raise, and found I didn't care. I can cancel, I said. I'd rather be with you. The smile that broke across his face was worth any number of abandoned plans. The drive to rural Pennsylvania was long but comfortable, filled with playlists we traded off controlling, conversations that meandered from serious to silly and back again, and stretches of companionable silence. I watched the landscape change through the window, urban sprawl giving way to rolling hills and farmland. Beside me, Ethan grew quieter as we approached his hometown, one hand on the steering wheel, the other frequently reaching over to rest on my knee, as if reassuring himself I was still there. It's not much, he warned as we turned onto a gravel driveway leading to a white farmhouse with green shutters. Nothing like Connecticut. I shook my head, taking in the sweeping views of fields and distant woods. It's beautiful, I said sincerely, and the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. As we parked, the front door opened, and a woman who could only be Ethan's mother stepped onto the porch. Same jawline, same warm eyes. Here we go, Ethan murmured, giving my hand a quick squeeze before getting out of the car. The next few days were a strange, sweet glimpse into Ethan's history, the places and people that had shaped him. His parents were warm and welcoming, treating me like any friend their son might bring home. His younger sister, Emma, immediately decided I was her new favorite person when I helped her with an English assignment. I slept in the guest room across the hall from Ethan's childhood bedroom, the distance between us both frustrating and necessary in this context. At night, after his family had gone to bed, Ethan would sometimes slip into the guest room, sitting on the edge of my bed, talking in hushed tones about memories triggered by being home, or sometimes just lying beside me in silence, our hands intertwined in the darkness. We were careful, hyper-aware of the creaking floorboards and the early rising habits of farmers. But there was something thrilling about these stolen moments, something precious about seeing this private side of him in the place where he'd grown up. On our third night there, during one of these quiet conversations, Ethan turned to me with an unusual seriousness. "I want to show you something tomorrow," he said. "There's this place." He trailed off, then started again. "It's important to me. I've never taken anyone else there." I nodded, curious but not wanting to press. "Okay," I said simply, and was rewarded with a quick soft kiss before he slipped back to his own room. The next day, after lunch, Ethan borrowed his dad's truck and drove us out past the edge of his family's property, following dirt roads that became increasingly narrow until finally he parked near the edge of a wooded area. "It's a bit of a hike from here," he said apologetically as we got out. I followed him along a barely visible path through the trees, the spring afternoon warm around us, sunlight dappling the ground through new leaves. After about 20 minutes of walking, the trees opened up to reveal a small clearing with a creek running through it. Not unlike the one we'd visited months ago near campus, but somehow wilder, more secluded. A large flat rock overlooked the water, worn smooth by time and weather. Ethan led me to it and sat down, patting the space beside him. "I found this place when I was 14, he said as I joined him. "Used to come here whenever things got too much at home or at school. Spent hours just sitting, thinking." I looked around, taking in the peacefulness of the spot. The gentle sound of running water, the rustling leaves, the sense of being completely removed from the rest of the world. "It's perfect," I said softly. Ethan nodded, looking out at the creek. "This is where I first admitted to myself that I might not be exactly who everyone thought I was," he said after a long moment. "Not just about sexuality, though that was part of it, but everything. Who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do with my life. Everyone had all these expectations, and out here was the only place where I could hear my own voice." The confession settled between us, its significance clear. He was sharing not just a place but a piece of himself, something private and formative. "Thank you for bringing me here," I said, reaching for his hand. He interlaced our fingers, squeezing gently. "I've been thinking a lot about those questions again lately," he continued, voice thoughtful. "Who I am, what I want. Being home always brings it up, but this time it's different." He turned to look at me, expression open and unguarded. This time I'm starting to find some answers. My heart beat faster at the implication. "What kind of answers?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Ethan shifted closer, his thigh pressing against mine on the sun-warmed stone. "That maybe all those categories I've been trying to fit myself into, straight, gay, whatever, aren't what matters. That maybe what matters is how I feel when I'm with you." His free hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone with a tenderness that made my breath catch. "And I feel more myself with you than I ever have with anyone else." The words washed over me like the sunlight through the trees, warm, illuminating, transformative. I leaned into his touch, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his eyes. "Ethan?" I started, not sure what I wanted to say, only knowing I needed to respond somehow to this gift he was giving me. He shook his head slightly. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know. And I wanted to tell you here, in this place that's always helped me see things clearly." He leaned forward then, and when our lips met, it felt like a different kind of kiss. Not tentative like our first, not desperate like some that had followed, but certain, deliberate. His hand slid from my face to the back of my neck, drawing me closer as the kiss deepened, became more insistent. Around us, the woods continued their peaceful rustling, the creek its steady flow, but I was aware only of Ethan, the warmth of him, the solidity, the realness that still sometimes seemed impossible. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against mine. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he whispered, the words barely audible over the sound of the water. And it terrifies me, but not the way it used to. Not because of what it means about me, but because of how much it matters. How much you matter. The confession hung in the air between us, stunning in its simplicity and enormity. I'm already there, I admitted, my own voice just as soft. Have been for a while now, falling in love with you. Saying it aloud was both frightening and freeing, releasing something I'd been holding inside for months. Ethan smiled, the expression lighting up his entire face, crinkling the corners of his eyes in the way that never failed to make my heart skip. Yeah? He asked, sounding almost surprised, as if he hadn't felt the evidence of my feelings in every touch, every glance. Yeah, I confirmed, unable to keep from smiling back. Pretty much since that night you asked me how I knew I was gay, something in the way you listened, really listened, I'd never felt so seen. Ethan's expression softened with recognition. That was the night I almost kissed you for the first time, he confessed. I went to bed thinking about it, how it would feel, what you would do. Drove myself crazy for weeks after that. We stayed at the creek for hours, trading stories and confessions, filling in gaps in our understanding of each other. The sunlight shifted around us, the shadows lengthening, but neither of us moved to leave. It felt too important, this moment of open connection, too rare to cut short. When we finally did make our way back to the truck, dusk was settling over the fields, and Ethan's hand remained firmly intertwined with mine until the final moments before we reached his parents' house. The rest of our visit passed in a blur of family dinners, local sightseeing, and those precious nighttime conversations. On our last evening, Ethan's parents insisted on a proper farewell dinner, his mother cooking all his favorite foods. The conversation flowed easily around the table, his father's stories from the farm, his sister's plans for college next year, his mother's gentle inquiries about our studies. I watched Ethan with them, seeing new dimensions of him in these interactions, understanding better the foundations of his kindness, his sense of humor, his occasional stubbornness. After dinner, as his parents cleaned up, refusing our help, Ethan suggested a walk. We wandered down the long driveway as darkness settled around us, the first stars appearing overhead. Thank you for coming, he said, bumping his shoulder against mine. It meant a lot having you here. I smiled, looking up at the vast rural sky. I'm glad I came. Your family is great. Great in ways mine wasn't always. Warm, present, accepting in ways I hoped would extend beyond the surface if they ever knew the full truth about us. I want to tell them, Ethan said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. About us, not right now. I need to find the right moment, the right words, but soon. The declaration took me by surprise. Are you sure? That's a big step. He nodded, expression resolute in the dim light from the distant porch. I'm sure. I'm tired of compartmentalizing my life, and I'm not ashamed of how I feel about you. The simple statement went straight to my heart, squeezing it with unexpected emotion. For all our intimate conversations, all our physical closeness over the past months, nothing had felt quite as significant as this. Ethan's willingness to bring our relationship into the light, to make it real in the eyes of others. Whatever happens, he continued, taking my hand, however they react, it doesn't change us. I need you to know that. I squeezed his hand, throat tight with feeling. I know, I said, and I did. Whatever uncertain path lay ahead of us, we would navigate it together. We stood there for a long moment under the stars, on the edge of something new and still unfolding, the future stretching before us, undefined but full of possibility. The drive back to campus the next day had a different quality than the journey out. Less tense, more comfortable. We listened to music, talked about classes resuming, made plans for the summer that casually assumed we'd be together. Simple, ordinary conversations made extraordinary by the undercurrent of what had been established between us. Not just desire or attraction, but something deeper, more enduring. Back at our apartment, we fell into new routines. Study sessions that ended with Ethan's head in my lap as I quizzed him on economic theories, his fingers tracing patterns on my knee. Mornings where I'd wake to find him making coffee in the kitchen, wearing my t-shirt. Nights spent in the same bed, sometimes his, sometimes mine, our bodies learning each other in ways both innocent and not. We still hadn't put a label on what we were, but the question seemed less important now. We were just us, Ethan and Liam, finding our way together. 2 weeks after spring break on a rainy Sunday afternoon, we were sprawled on the couch watching a movie neither of us was really paying attention to. Ethan's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, then sat up straighter, expression shifting. "It's my mom," he said, voice tight with what might have been nervousness. "She's asking if they can come visit next weekend. Dad has some conference in the city and they thought they'd stop by campus." "That's nice," I said cautiously, watching his face. "Is it okay with you?" He was quiet for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, I think it is." He typed out a response, sent it, then set his phone down. When he turned to me, his expression was both apprehensive and determined. "I want to tell them when they're here," he said. "About us." My heart skipped. "Are you sure? You don't have to rush this." He reached for my hand, his touch grounding. "I'm sure. I've been thinking about it since we got back. I've spent so much of my life trying to be what I thought everyone wanted me to be. I don't want to do that anymore." There was a certainty in his voice that hadn't been there before. And if they can't accept this part of me, of us, then I need to know that too. The week that followed was a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. We cleaned the apartment more thoroughly than we had since moving in, discussed what to have for dinner when his parents visited, tried to imagine how the conversation might go. "They love you," I reminded Ethan one night as we lay in bed, his head on my chest, my fingers running through his hair. "That's not going to change." He nodded against me. "I know. It's just, this is going to surprise them. A lot." It was an understatement. As far as his family knew, Ethan had only ever dated women. He'd never given them any reason to question his sexuality. This would be coming from what would seem like nowhere to them. "Do you want me to be here when you tell them?" I asked. "Or would it be easier alone?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might have fallen asleep. Then, "I want you with me," he said finally. "If that's okay." "Of course," I assured him, tightening my arm around him. "Whatever you need." He tilted his head up to look at me, eyes serious in the dim light. "I'm doing this for me," he said. "Not because I feel pressured or because I think I owe it to anyone, but because I want to live honestly, and because what we have is too important to hide." The words warmed me from the inside out, a certainty amid all the uncertainty. Friday arrived with unexpected speed. We spent the morning restlessly preparing, making sure the guest room was ready, grocery shopping for dinner ingredients, both of us too on edge to focus on anything else. When the knock finally came at our door around 4, Ethan froze momentarily, then took a deep breath and went to answer it. I stayed back in the living room, giving him space for the initial greetings. I heard his mother's voice first, warm, excited, then his father's deeper tones. There was the sound of hugs, of bags being set down, of Ethan guiding them into the apartment. Then they were there, in our small living room, his mother with her kind eyes and quick smile, his father more reserved but with the same straightforward manner as his son. "Liam!" his mother exclaimed, coming forward to hug me as if I were family rather than just a roommate. "So good to see you again." The next few hours passed in a blur of conversation and food preparation. Ethan and I moved around each other in the kitchen with the easy familiarity of people who have shared the space for months, while his parents sat at our small table, his father asking about classes, his mother telling stories about Emma's latest school adventures. It was comfortable, normal, deceptively so, given what was coming. After dinner, as we sat around the table with coffee and the apple pie his mother had brought, I sensed a shift in Ethan. A subtle tensing, a straightening of posture. His hand found mine under the table, squeezing once. "Mom, Dad," he said, voice steady despite the nervousness I could feel radiating from him. "There's something I want to talk to you about." His parents exchanged a quick glance, picking up on his serious tone. "What is it, honey?" his mother asked, setting down her coffee cup. Ethan took a deep breath, his hand still gripping mine beneath the table. "It's about me and Liam." Another breath. "We're together. As more than roommates, more than friends." The words hung in the air, simple and enormous. His father's expression remained unreadable, but his mother's eyes widened slightly, darting between our faces. "Together?" she repeated, as if making sure she'd heard correctly. Ethan nodded, and in a gesture that made my heart swell, he lifted our joined hands onto the table, making visible what had been hidden. Yes, we've been seeing each other for a few months now. His voice grew more confident as he continued. I didn't plan for this to happen. It took me by surprise, but it's real, and it's important to me. Liam is important to me. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever, though it probably lasted only seconds. Then his mother reached across the table, placing her hand over our intertwined ones. "Oh, Ethan," she said softly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you for telling us." It wasn't quite acceptance yet, but it wasn't rejection either. His father cleared his throat, his expression thoughtful. "This is unexpected," he said finally, and I felt Ethan tense beside me. But then his father continued, "But you're our son. That doesn't change." Simple words, profound in their implication. Ethan's grip on my hand loosened slightly, relief evident in the subtle relaxation of his shoulders. "You're sure about this?" his father asked, looking directly at Ethan. "About how you feel?" "I'm sure," Ethan said without hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything." His mother was looking at me now, her expression a complex mix of surprise, curiosity, and what might have been the beginning of understanding. "And you, Liam?" she asked gently. "How do you feel about our son?" The direct question caught me off guard, but